I'm really delighted that you have accepted the invitation to join our symposium, our very first one on fearless home learning. And I think this is such an important opportunity to sort of celebrate, reflect and learn from our experience of education during the pandemic. So I'm really thankful to you all for dedicating lots of time and effort for this occasion, and especially to Ian Matthews for being patient with me and organising the tech and the recording, as well as Matthew Llewellyn as well. And I'd also like to thank all the staff that are listening live, even though I can't see how many there are of you. Thank you for being here. And also for your encouragement in setting up the event. I'd also like to welcome our external guests, Nahida Marasingham, who's head of Raffin Primary School. Thank you for your time this morning. And we may have one other later, which is Dr. Sean McDurney, who's Director of Learning and Innovation at UWC at Atlantic. So now I will pass you to Kevin Stannard, who is our very own Director of Innovation and Learning for the GDST.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a real privilege to be part of this, because I think back to the first Fearlessness conference that you kicked off with this year, and how different the year looks even after that. I just wanted to pick up on some of the theme that, excuse me, some of the theme that was developed there, because I think we established at that conference that being fearless wasn't the same as being reckless, that it meant doing something knowing but not ignoring the possible consequences of what we were doing. So I suppose it could be described rather boringly as audacity armed with a risk assessment. At least that's what it felt like in normal times. But now, in the last few weeks, we've asked teachers, students and schools to show fearlessness in the face of frequent change in the guidelines, the rules, the expectations, almost daily changes before the lockdown itself. To be fearless in the face of unfamiliarity with the new ways of working that we were expecting them to adopt, almost turning on a sixpence in terms of technology, the way the timetable worked, the workload that would be expected of teachers and of students, the amount of screen time that might be involved and problems around that. And also to show fearlessness in the face of uncertainty about the future. We still don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know how it's going to end. We don't know whether it'll end in stages. We don't know how we are going to define the new normal when it comes to pass. So in that fluid and uncertain context, doing something radical wasn't in itself fearless. We couldn't do nothing. As a group of schools, though, I think it's fair to say that we chose not to be buffeted by events, but to try and take some control as far as we could. We started by defining a distinctive and original approach. We chose to call it guided home learning, not remote or distant learning, because what we wanted to do wasn't going to involve remoteness and it wasn't going to involve distance. It was guided home learning. Last night, I Googled guided home learning, and out of the several million results, the first two refer to GDST. Royal High and Shrewsbury come up first. It's a distinctive brand already, in a sense. We've established the territory. Now, I just want to start this conference really by saying a little bit about three periods in this. In a sense, we're actors in a drama in three acts. There was the act that ran up to Easter. There's the act that we're in at the moment, the summer term. And the third act, hopefully, will be the prospective return to normality. And fearlessness is involved in all three, I think. In the run-up to Easter, it seems so long ago now, but so much was achieved. Preparation in the weeks before the lockdown, and then the fortnight of trying and testing. Preparation that was so effective. I know from school to school, and I know in your case particularly, getting staff and students ready, auditing technology, auditing skills, filling gaps, training, getting people confident, at least to make a start. There was real fearlessness in grasping that. challenge and making sure people were ready. But that fortnight of trying and testing involved the epitome of fearlessness. It was about failing, welcoming the opportunity to review, to regroup, to adapt, facing up to failure. We talk about it a lot. This was it in action on a day-to-day basis. Of course, we had to turn and do things differently and change rules. We're still changing guidelines around live learning even now, because we're aware of the increasing awareness of what can and can't be done technically, what can and can't be done and should and shouldn't be done in terms of safeguarding. We're still developing this model, understandably, and what people have done is to fearlessly say, okay, we'll give it a try from minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. Being ready to review in the Easter holidays, regroup, come out confidently, particularly in relation to parents. It's been really interesting that many parents have kind of, in their initial and understandable fears about their own finances, complaints about what they see as being, well, they're not in school, why are they paying fees, what are the teachers doing? They're kind of betraying, to some extent, a need to find out more about what teaching and learning today really means. It doesn't just mean sitting listening to a teacher and being, in this case, glued to a screen. So there's lots of education to do, not just to the students, but the parents. Then in Act 2, and we're in Act 2 at the moment, the emphasis has been on sustainability. It is, the adrenaline got us through to Easter. We needed a model that got teachers and students and parents through to arguably, possibly, the end of the summer. We needed to make sure that the timetable worked for everybody. So it meant adjusting, not necessarily timings, but buffers within those timings to make sure that people had time to breathe, to exercise, to actually regroup. But what's been interesting is making it possible to show how students can take more control of their own learning. We talk about that a lot. We talk about the need to step back sometimes. This is an opportunity to do that in a different sort of way, the ways that we might be able to learn in terms of the future. Schools have been fantastic in showing fearlessly that it's not just about education. It's about pastoral and social implications of joining together in live teaching, in collaborating in teaching and learning. It's not just about academic progress, that's clearly important, but the importance of what we're doing, maintaining an educational momentum, is as much pastoral and social as it is education. And then there's a fearless response to the cancellation of exams. In Year 11 and Year 13, it's a golden opportunity to prioritise teaching over testing, to say that we don't just teach for the tests. We're not just going through the specifications. We're doing far more than that. And what you at Sydenham and in other GDST schools have done is to show clearly what's possible. As week goes on, week passes week in the summer term, seeing what can happen subject by subject in terms of really deep learning and not just slavishly following tests and specifications. And then Act 3, we don't know when that act will start. The interval might be a long time. But preparing for life after lockdown, I think thinking about the legacies that we might take with us, the more routine use of EdTech, it won't necessarily revolutionize what we do when we get back. We'll all be so grateful for the opportunity to do things in a face-to-face and possibly analog way for much of the day. But I'm sure that the experience that we've all been through, including this one, will make it possible for us to be much more open about what we do in the future in terms of day-to-day teaching and learning. The shape of the school day, the distinction between formal and informal learning may well be different after the experience of the last weeks and months. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how our provision for special needs students will change. We're aware that there are real challenges to extending that sort of support in a guided home learning environment. We're also aware that while a lot of pupils are safeguarding risks when they're at home, unfortunately, and enjoy being at school much more, they'll be very grateful to get back. But there are pupils who we know actually feel safer at home, have real challenges when they're in a busy social environment at school. And we need to think about whether guided home learning has something to help us with there when going forward. Another legacy, I think, is an enduring culture of collaboration between teachers and between schools within groups. And I think that's something we really want to carry forward with us. The idea that we are literally working together and helping each other and supporting each other and not reinventing the wheel. And finally, in terms of legacies, a better understanding of and respect for teachers and schools. I think what will come out of this, it's been a bumpy ride in terms of parents' expectations, but I think one of the things that they will generally carry with us, that will carry with us, is parents understanding more about what teaching and learning involves, in a more hands-on way. So in this sense, in Act 3, I think fearlessness means shaping a future educational offer that doesn't just try to restore the pre-COVID classroom and curriculum. We can take things forward. So as I say, we're only halfway through, hopefully, Act 2. So it's a bit early to be taking a bow, but I think when the curtain does finally fall, the people that will be stepping forward will be our teachers. They have been absolutely amazing in stepping into an uncertain environment and really dealing with it in a fantastically resourceful way. And some among those teachers have just emerged as absolute heroes in their willingness at the drop of a hat to help colleagues, just stepping in completely irrespective of their roles in the schools and saying, look, I've got this skill, I can help, I can share, I can support. The students, we talk so much about resilience, we talk about fearlessness, the topic of this morning. The students on the whole have shown exactly those qualities that we say we want to see in GDST schools. And that's a phenomenal sort of advert for what they are and what we do to help them. And the parents emerging as partners in this process. I think this could be long term, this could be a really constructive development, that parents seeing themselves as more hands-on in the process, seeing schools not just as child-minding or institutions, but as educational institutions, and that it doesn't stop at the school gates. And finally, in terms of taking a bow, I think at the end of the process, schools like Sydenham will be absolutely outstanding in this. You are fitting hosts of this conference because you've led the field in this, and you show a combination of all the crucial ingredients: resourceful and heroic teachers, resilient, adaptive students, and parents who increasingly see themselves as partners in an outstanding school environment. So I just want to say that it's a real pleasure and privilege for me and my colleagues in the GDST to be part of an organisation that has schools like you leading in all of these areas. And I look forward to the contributions of specialists to address them all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Especially on that last note, I think that was such a lovely thing to say to Sydenham High, and I'm sure all our staff listening will really appreciate that. And I know quite a few are, because they've just WhatsApped me. So that's a good sign. So if I pass on now to Fiona, who's going to, obviously our in-house school counsellor, who's going to talk to us about the pastoral side in particular of what this pandemic has sort of changed and meant and what we can learn from. Hi.
Thank you, Rachel. Welcome. It is really fun to get to be a part of today, and also incredibly surreal to be not actually seeing all of your faces. I was really aware this week when watching Catherine's morning meeting in an empty staff room was a really tender reminder to me of what I really missed, which is being in the company of all of you and getting to see our sweet students every day. You are all navigating being at home, perhaps with friends, family, or alone, and I'm aware that you're also navigating teaching from a very different perspective, from a different technology perspective, a pastoral perspective, and an educational one. Even as I prepared today, I was aware of just how different it is to be talking when I can't see your faces, read a room, or be able to check in before and after with so many of you. I think that sense of disconnect and connect is a part of what I imagine so many of you are experiencing right now, and that the parallels for me here today are probably very similar to what it is like for you as you've been teaching over the last couple of weeks. And so as I've stood in line at the shops this week and gone for runs, I've spent a lot of time thinking about Rachel's invitation about what it means to be fearless in this time of home teaching from a pastoral perspective. For you as teachers, for us as a community, and for us and with students. I've spent a lot of time listening to Brené Brown, who's a social worker and researcher, and I cannot recommend her podcast, Unlocking Us, highly enough, because her words are much more eloquent than mine. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about also where I'm experiencing fear and fearlessness as I too try and care for our students. So I want to ground us first in where we are. Although this isn't forever, this is also for now. We're existing in a time of enormous uncertainty and global fear, which for me, although that is truly quite fascinating, is also very exhausting. And although I could talk about anxiety all day, I promise to touch base briefly about it. which is that if we think about anxiety from an anthropological perspective, it often functions as a communal experience, which means if I'm about to be chased by a tiger, my amygdala, my anxiety center, is going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. What that means is that if I'm about to be chased by a tiger, chances are you probably are as well. It means your body is going to respond in the same way. It's also going to activate that same anxiety system, which means you might be entering into this conversation today feeling fairly calm, but I can guarantee that even if you're feeling fairly calm, someone around you is probably feeling anxious, which means as a whole system right now, we are working at a slightly more elevated sense of being than we are used to. I notice that for me, that operates in a sense of being exhausted. There is a different level of which our brains are operating. When you walk to the shops now, you're having to think about avoiding people and only touching something once. Things that once were very normal activities, your brain is having to work so much harder on. Being online all day, we are all used to being incredibly face-forward people. I notice that my eyes are exhausted. I spend a lot of time talking to friends who are used to sitting at computers going, how on earth do you do this? My eyes feel like they're going squiff. At the end of the day, I notice that my words jumble up. Talking to me is a little bit like talking to a cryptic crossword. I notice that I mix and match my words because my brain is truly quite exhausted, which means I know that doing self-care for me looks very different than it did 6 weeks ago. A small example for me that I have noticed is that I can switch out of video and onto audio when talking to friends or family at the end of the day because another video call is just truly too exhausting for my brain. So not only are we as individuals in this unusual experience, suddenly we are aware that everyone is in a very similar but also different boat. So when we are taking care of others, we also need to be taking care of ourselves first. So today, as I talk, really it is not just about how we engage in the world fearlessly, but when we engage in the world fearlessly, we're then able to offer good pastoral care for ourselves, which allows us to actually much more effectively do good pastoral care for and with others. And so we can do this well together because there is truly no transcript for this time. And I'll get back to that at the end of my talk today. So what I'm going to encourage you, although I cannot see any of you and force you to do anything right now, which is a real bummer for me, I would love you all to at least write down this prompt. And if you don't have time to do it now, to do it later, which is that I want you to write down one thing that has gone really well from home learning. Maybe it's enjoying the flexibility, wearing your own clothes, wearing slippers. Jot that one thing down. And then I want you to also jot one thing down that you feel fearful of. Maybe it's not being a good enough teacher. Maybe it's not being sure whether your class are truly understanding some of your curriculum. Maybe it's the fear of not knowing how you're going to get your marking done or lesson planning done and make dinner and help your kids with their homework all in one evening. For now, I want that fear to be school related, but I'm aware that there are so many fears for all of us right now. And my encouragement is going to be, although I can't pause and make sure that the whole room is doing this, I want you to check in with colleagues later, and I want to encourage you to be accountable to that. And then we're going to do something which again is going to feel really awkward for me to do right now, which is I want us to remember to breathe. Anytime we notice that we start to think about fear, our body really appropriately so starts to become a little bit escalated. We might not even be truly aware of it, but chances are it slightly does. I have often made all of you do deep breathing before, and I'm lucky in that I can see some of the people who are presenting today, so I have some rubric of people, but I'm going to ask even the people who are looking at my screen who I can see to wriggle their shoulders, just check in with their body. They're going to put 2 feet on their floor, and then we're just going to do 2 or 3 deep breaths. So when you're ready, I want you to just take a big breath in and slowly out. And we're going to do one more. Breathe in. And out. And 1/3 one. Breathe in. Breathe out. To engage more fearlessly, we must first check in with where we are. So thank you all for doing that. I'm going to trust that you have. If I cannot simply be fearless with and for someone else if I don't know that I'm anxious. I can't be fearless with and for someone else if I hadn't realized how exhausted I am. But if I know I'm anxious and tired, I can lean into that fearlessness with much more wisdom and awareness of what I might be needing, which is probably a very strong coffee. And so you're not alone in this season. Brene Brown talks about our terrible first time. We are all doing something for the first time. First time in lockdown with your families or with people or alone. First experience of a pandemic. First experience of global anxiety. First experience of teaching from home. First experience for me of realizing how few steps I can achieve in a day when walking around my house. And for students too. We must begin by normalizing our feeling in order to be honest and real about where we're at. So I'm going to give you 2 more quick skills that we're going to do. And again, I want you to, if you've got a piece of paper, to grab that paper and jot these down. These might be prompts that, again, I'm always going to encourage. We have to model what we want to preach. So one of them is a quick one. This could be a helpful one for form times. It might be helpful for a one-on-one. I also make sure that we're using these at dinner time at my house. And so I want you to right now just think about one word that would describe where you're at this morning. Maybe it's calm, maybe it's tired, maybe it's grateful, maybe it's energized, maybe it's exhausted. Just one word. When we share something like one word, it doesn't clearly encapsulate all of how we're doing, but it begins to give someone a little bit of a chance to check in, to notice, and for us to notice with ourselves. The second one is a similar one. This might appeal to some of you more mathsy types brains, but on a scale of 0 to 100, I want you to just notice where you're at. 100 being your tank is so full, you're feeling full, alive, you're feeling loved, you're feeling connected. And 0 is you are running on red. You are out of your tank. Again, this is a really quick system. We don't have to justify, defend, or explain where we're at. We're just noticing and then sharing it with another. It could be a form time. It could be the start of a lesson. You could get your group to do it. It's really quick. Once we then notice our fear, the next bit is that we want to befriend the feeling of fear, which is often discomfort. I vividly remember the first time I taught a class at Sydenham, and I had agreed to it, truly not really considering the fact that I am not only a teacher, I have no idea how to teach a class. I am used to one-on-one or small numbers of people. I noticed that as I began and walked into the classroom, I was nervous. I started to get a little bit of those anxiety sweats. When I checked in, what I noticed was, though, that nervousness and anxiety for me, when I tapped into it and checked in with it, was because I cared. I truly cared about what I was talking about. I cared about the students, and it mattered. I also quite naturally cared about my self-esteem. And at the end of the lesson, I had to check in again. There was definitely some discomfort. Doing things for the first time, doing things that we're not comfortable in or confident is uncertain, and it can feel really uncomfortable. When we fear, we are often afraid of disappointment, afraid of failing, or of judgment, of other people's expectations, whether it's colleagues, students, parents. And fear is a really powerful emotion. Although at times it can be helpful, it often holds us back and asks us not to be bold or to risk, but to be fearless, which is why I love that we talk about this at Sydenham, is for us to be courageous, creative, connected, brave, and daring greatly. That might sometimes come alongside some of the anxiety sweats too. So embracing discomfort of fear is often messy, and that's where our boundaries come in. Boundaries create space for us to show up well pastorally right now. If we are able to take care of ourselves in a boundaried and sensitive way, then we can model that for students as well, and we can show up for others in a more effective way. So for ourselves, first of all, having boundaries helps us to create space. So I know, for example, that it is really important for me to have separation between my work and my personal life. So something like getting dressed in the morning and being dressed for work is a really important part of my day at the moment. For others, that might look different. It might look like having around space. Maybe it's important you have a certain space in your home that you're working, or maybe you're someone who likes to work in lots of different places because that keeps you energized and animated. For some, it might be relational. You might notice that catching up with family or friends at the end of a workday is just exhausting and you don't feel like you can really show up. So maybe you schedule calls for the weekend. Boundaries are going to look different. Ellie spoke to this with students as well this week, of what it looks like to have boundaries with students. At school, we create so many boundaries around clothing, timeliness, how they function and operate in school, and we are constantly adjusting and creating new boundaries for them. Ellie spoke about the appropriateness of clothing when we're in meetings, and I was called into the tenderness as I tried to do therapy with a student this week on a trampoline, and I'm reminded of the importance of creating a containable space as we moved our session back to a table again. There is a new attention span for students and for ourselves. And although I could preach all day about the role of anxiety and how it's impacting our brain functioning, in short, we have to be kind to ourselves and to others to notice that our brains are operating truly differently than normal. And then finally, once we are embracing the discomfort, it allows us to lean in to courage and bravery. And for us right now, that's going to be on a spectrum and look different for all of us. I, for example, have noticed that a couple of times before Easter half term, for example, I noticed I was feeling a bit disconnected from staff and students. I didn't quite know where people were really at. So I sent a newsletter around to staff, and that felt truly awkward. It didn't really quite feel like my place, but I also was so overwhelmed and grateful for the response that I got back, how connected it not only made me feel, but also apparently made others. Another example was that I noticed again that I was feeling a bit disconnected, and on the run I thought, well, why don't I send out a questionnaire to students and see where they're at? And then I noticed as I started to form it, I suddenly noticed that fear arise, a little bit of fear of feeling like it was a bit random. What was Ellie going to think of me asking to put out a questionnaire, which I didn't really know how to even put out to students, or what it was for, or what I was really asking? When I engaged and listened to that discomfort, I noticed that it was coming from a place of me really caring, really wanting to connect. So we posted it. And sure enough, within 2 days or 3 days, I had over 190 students respond to that questionnaire. It was truly mind-boggling and really surprising to me. It could have also failed, and that would have also given me data that that wasn't a helpful way for me to connect. And part of this is us going, we have to listen to our guts, to embrace the discomfort, to lean in with courage. So being courageous and brave today might look like a number of different things for you. It might look like leaving a lesson plan at a standard that is simply good enough and not perfect because you also have a family to tend to and dinner to cook. The bravery might come from navigating your own experience of yourself and prioritizing. Bravery might look like trying a new technology or a new way of presenting to your students that feels uncomfortable and new. It might look like checking in with your students and not really knowing how a one-on-one or a small group talk is going to go because you don't know what they're going to say or whether it's going to get awkward. Bravery might look like vulnerably and honestly checking in with a colleague or asking for some help. So right now, I want to encourage you to jot one way down in which you can lean in to fearlessness this next week for yourselves and for and with students. I've just set up a Google Doc, which I'll share later today, with ideas, because what I've noticed is that in conversations with some of you, you are coming up with the phenomenal ideas of how to connect in new and different ways. I can talk about pastoral care and fearlessness all day, but you are all the ones doing the hard work on the ground day in and day out. So here's my encouragement for today. I want to encourage you to listen and to trust your gut, to name and identify where you are at and listen to your fear, because then we can befriend our fear, we can join our fear and lean much more courageously and bravely into creativity, confidence, and fearless personhood. This is truly hard, and none of you are alone. You're good enough just as you are, and we are so thankful for the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. I wrote down quite a lot for that. I really like the idea that you said not forever for now, but also with that sort of statement, the importance of checking ourselves before we can actually check others. And that's, as teachers, I think we're all guilty of putting ourselves last, actually. So I think that's such an important reminder for us all. And I love the little activities. Yeah. So thank you so much. We're going to go now to Kat Scott. You okay, Kat? And the Director of Education and Research at the Chartered College of Teaching. And Kat's going to talk to us about the research surrounding effective home learning.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I've popped a few notes and links onto a slide deck that I think is going to be shared with you all, but I'm actually not going to use that. I'm going to talk from my notes from that, but those are there for people who want to access it afterwards. But this morning, I'm just going to talk through a few ideas. It's in some ways very helpful following Kevin and Fiona because they've really set up some of the things that I want to reference. Of course, the flip side of that is it's unhelpful when they've said much better than I'm going to some of the points that I want to make. I'm going to talk, as Rachel has said, a little bit about what research says about effective distance and home learning, or perhaps I should be using the phrase guided home learning, copyright GDST 2020. But of course, the reality is that we don't have really any, or at least not very much research specific to this situation. There is some research out there about school closures, particularly in other parts of the world where there have been school closures due to natural disasters, for example, There are some historic things where there have been school closures because of other pandemics, but not particularly recently. So the responses to those have obviously been quite different in terms of having the technology we have available. We know about, for example, summer learning loss, and that sort of effect of 6-week gaps in the summer. And there are things that generally about online learning and what might work. But that tends to be more focused on university or adult learning, at least the most robust research in that place tends to be. So there are some challenges in saying what does the research say here, but we can draw some best bets from what we already know, and that's what I'm going to try and do today. When I started thinking about this presentation, my immediate response was to start with, okay, let's say starting with the pastoral, that's the most important thing to start with, because if you don't get that right, you don't get anything else right. But then I realised, just as Fiona said in the previous presentation, that that's actually not the first thing to think about. Yourself, you have to be the first thing to think about. I'm not going to overstress this because Fiona's articulated it so well already. But I saw someone describing it as the putting your own oxygen mask on first effect, that actually it's really easy to be so focused on supporting your pupils that you don't make sure you're thinking about your own well-being and yourself. We know that teachers have all of their own pressures as well, that you're trying to support pupils at a distance whilst possibly looking after your own children, after your own family. Even if you haven't got caring responsibilities at home, you're worrying about things, you're worrying about family at a distance, you're worrying about friends. It's a really difficult time for everyone, and we need to focus on ourselves and making sure that we're in the best possible place that we can be before we start to think about our pupils. So that's absolutely key. Then I think this next phase is the pastoral support that we're providing for our pupils. It's very easy, almost because we know more about it, to jump straight into the what do we know about online learning? How can we deliver the content that they're missing out on? How can we ensure we're still assessing and giving feedback to our pupils? But the reality is, if we haven't got pupils who are safe and well, feeling confident, physically and emotionally supported in their well-being, then they're not going to be able to focus on any learning that we provide for them. And of course, at a much simpler level even than that, if our pupils aren't able to access or engage with the resources we're providing, they're not going to be benefiting from them. This obviously varies hugely school to school, and you'll know what it's looking like in your context, but some schools are really struggling to get pupils to be logging on and accessing the things that they're wanting them to do. And there's a whole range of different reasons for that. So we need to start with making that as simple as possible. Do we know what the reasons are that pupils might not be accessing things? How can we support them with that? There's an important point there when we think about online learning in particular. Again, I'm sure you have a very good picture of to what extent the pupils in your school have access to devices. But again, the sort of national picture suggests that in some schools, relatively few necessarily have their own devices. They may have a device in the house, which has been sufficient previously, but if you've suddenly got 3 children at home, all of whom have work being set by their school online that they're expected to access at the same time, that's really challenging. So there are some implications there for how you think about synchronous learning, so actual sort of video conferencing like this versus asynchronous activities which pupils can access at different times if they're sharing devices. There's also a point that actually what can be the inclination there is, okay, if you know a pupil doesn't have access to broadband, doesn't have access to a device, you say, all right, we'll do a paper-based version for you, and you start with the online version and then create the paper-based version. That can be a bit problematic, because what that means really is that they're getting a sort of adapted, probably less good version, and if they're already struggling with access to materials, that's possibly going to make things even worse for them. I remember from 3 years of working with Kevin, his ongoing attempt to print the whole of the internet was never very successful. So this sort of challenge of, can we in those cases think first what works well as paper-based and then put that online for those who can access it, so that the focus is on the sort of lowest barriers to entry we can possibly have. Finally, around the kind of pastoral support side, one of the things that we'll all be feeling is this huge sense of isolation, balanced with, as I think a couple of us have mentioned, the very intense feeling you get from being constantly on video. I had 7 hours on video conferences yesterday, and at the end of that, I could barely speak, let alone think. And but yet we know for our pupils, schools are not just a place that they're learning, they're also a place that they're connecting with you as teachers on a human level and with their peers. So how can we still build opportunities for human connection and collaboration in? I've seen things where teachers are just doing kind of form time check-in in the morning to make sure that those pupils feel they've got someone there, that it's not all too remote, that it's not all too distant. So thinking about setting up that environment before you start to worry almost about the academic side, I think is really key. Related to that, of course, is the idea that parents are going to be playing a really key role here. And so making sure that we're supporting parents as best we can. There's quite a lot of evidence around how best to engage parents generally. Janet Goodall's one of the academics who's worked most extensively on this and a huge expert in the field. She's written a couple of guides for us, which are freely available from the Charter College website, around supporting and engaging parents in home learning. And she highlights that, again, of course, we don't know the best ways to do it in this particular environment, but generally the critical thing is that parents are showing that learning is valued in the home, that actually it's not about trying to get parents to necessarily deliver content directly. There might be a whole range of challenges with that. Often parents don't feel that they know enough about the content to be able to do that. We know things like, particularly around maths anxiety, for example, parents can feel very much like they'll struggle to support children with those. And of course that applies at secondary level, but also at primary, where they may not have been taught the same methods or approaches themselves as are now being used with children, and that can become quite confusing. So it's not really about trying to get them to deliver content. It's about making sure that they are able to encourage their children to feel confident, to feel that they want to engage with learning, to show that it's valued, to continue those conversations we expect to happen anyway about the learning that children have been doing. And roles and responsibilities for those parents are also really challenging, because many of them will be trying to work the same as we are. I don't have children, but I've got 6 dogs in the house currently, and trying to do my job whilst having 6 dogs running around my feet is challenging enough. So I can't begin to imagine the challenge for parents who are trying to do their job whilst also wanting to do the best thing for their children. So thinking about that, I suppose 4 tips around supporting parents. The first of those is keeping it really simple. What are the things that pupils really need to know? What do we really want to focus on? What can be left aside? Again, making it simple for people to access what we're doing, so that the barriers aren't there, where if you've spent the first 20 minutes of your day just trying to log on to 4 different websites with different sets of usernames and passwords, that's not necessarily going to set you up very confidently as a parent for then supporting your child through the rest of the day. The second of those is being realistic about how much we can expect children to do. There seems to be huge variation at the moment in how much work different schools across the country are setting. And of course, it's going to vary by context, it's going to vary by the age of the children that you're working with. But typically, planning for sort of 5 hours or 6 hours of learning that pupils might have had face-to-face is not going to be realistic. Again, Janet Goodall in her work has suggested, I like the way she phrases this, don't produce so much work that parents are going to feel they're failing their children if they can't get through it all. And we certainly are hearing that. We're hearing the other side too. We're hearing some parents saying there's not enough for my child to do, but you don't want to end up in a situation where parents are feeling, I haven't got through all the work that I've been set, I'm going to have to sit and work with my children all evening as well, and it's starting to interrupt family time. The third one, I've touched already on this a little bit, is thinking about the context of those families you're working with, the resources and devices they have available, trying to suggest ideas for learning that aren't putting an unreasonable burden on families or making assumptions about what families will necessarily have access to at home in terms of devices, but also in terms of time or space or the materials they might need for different activities. And finally, again, this touches on Fiona's points again, that it's a really challenging time for all of us. And while children and young people are very adaptable, they will take time to adapt. And ultimately, it's more important that the children are feeling loved, supported and confident than they are that they finish every possible worksheet. So making sure that parents understand where that emphasis should be placed at this time. So once we've got the sort of support in place that we need at home to build the right environment for effective remote and home learning, there are a few things that we know that are sort of best bets around how we can deliver effective online learning. And I know Matthew's going to talk about online learning a bit more in a minute, so I won't go too deep with these. But the first thing to emphasise is that we're not in a situation of normal online learning. There was a great article on EduCause that talks about this, saying this is sort of an emergency online learning situation. It's easy when you see people saying, oh, well, of course, online learning is not as good as face-to-face, it's not working as well, that they're talking about a very rapid move to something that wasn't necessarily well planned. My experience, of course, is that GDST schools are very well prepared with online learning, but that's not the case for all schools. So we have to accept that this isn't a kind of normal, traditional online learning situation where online learning is being used as a means to work alongside face-to-face activity. So everything is going to feel very different. One suggestion that's been very widely made is that certainly initially, and this will depend how long the closures last for, that the focus in terms of content should be on consolidation of things that have already been learned, rather than adding more and more new content, for a range of different reasons. Firstly, that we need to have time to get used to these new ways of working, and if we're trying to do that whilst also getting used to new content, there's more risk of misunderstanding, of people feeling left behind, of large amounts of worry. But also that if we look at research around things like the summer learning loss, which I've mentioned before, that's not just because over the 6 weeks of the summer pupils are not being taught. It's because we know quite a lot about how pupils remember and forget over time. If you look at things like Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve, if things aren't revisited regularly soon after they're first learned, they will be forgotten. And so that 6-week summer holiday gap can mean that things that are learnt in the summer term are inevitably not revisited by many pupils over the summer. And what we've learned from that is that things like summer schools, activities, resources and things, ways of talking to parents that revisit things that have been learnt in the summer term are really helpful. So we can learn from that here as well, that actually even if we're accepting that normal teaching is not going to be happening, what we don't want to happen is losing and forgetting all of the things that were learned when schools were open. So making sure we're revisiting and consolidating those could be really powerful. Another point is that it's really important not to assume that pupils know how to learn well online, that using tools for social media, for research is different to having an online learning experience. So setting guidance and ground rules about how they engage with teachers, how they engage with other pupils is really key. We also know quite a lot about effective use of multimedia. So when you're building slideshows or videos, breaking down content, keeping those visuals very simple, trying not to read out slides directly, because you create a kind of split effect there that becomes quite difficult for pupils to try and read and listen to the same thing at the same time. Richard Mayer has a set of multimedia learning principles which are really helpful in explaining some of the things to think about there. But overall, actually, what we know about effective online learning for pupils is that it's mostly the same things that work well face-to-face. It's a different medium, but it's not a completely different means of learning. So if you think about the things that you know anyway that make good pedagogy, clear teacher explanations that build and connect to prior learning, effective modelling and scaffolding of processes. We've seen people can use visualizers quite well online. There are whiteboards you can use online. There are apps that allow you to do to show things in the same way as you might have done face-to-face. We know that regular formative assessment will be critically important, even more so in this environment, because in a classroom environment, there are all sorts of cues you can pick up on that suggest when a pupil might not have understood something you've explained. And that isn't going to be obvious in an online environment unless you're building in perhaps quizzing, recall tasks, mind map tasks that mean that you can check on whether your pupils are understanding and where you need to follow up. One of the advantages, of course, is that if you're using technology for that kind of quizzing, you can also provide automated feedback in some cases to support their learning. There's lots of opportunities for you to structure and practice and recall, as I've mentioned already, to not forget things they've been doing before. And really critically tied in with this whole fearlessness point is building and supporting pupils' self-regulation. The Education Endowment Foundation have just published a rapid review of effective remote and online learning. And one of the things that comes out really strongly there is that importance of supporting students' self-regulation, their motivation, their ability to be independent in their learning. That's clearly critical. And that's something we talked about at the start of this year at the Fearless. So that's great. That's something that's already in your mind. Finally, it's worth saying that, of course, there's also a huge amount of online learning out there for if you have. Morgan and others have shared lists of free online courses. There are lots of opportunities to connect and talk and share through webinars like this, through social media, and it's definitely worth taking up those opportunities, again, if you have time and if you want to, recognising all of the other pressures that are out there. Ultimately, teaching quality, just as in face-to-face, is the most important thing in terms of the learning you're providing. So concentrating on yourself and your teaching and making sure that you're in the right place to teach, just as having your pupils in the right place to learn, is really critical. All of the things that I've mentioned are referenced in a reading list that I've put together. If you go to chartered.college, which is the member website, but anyone can access this, it's work page, something called online distance and home learning selected reading. It's a really extensive list I've put together of research, links, ideas, blogs around online learning and distance learning, different ways schools have approached that. So it's got everything that I've mentioned in there, but loads more besides. And the Charter College usually is a sort of member access only, but we've made all of our resources related to the current pandemic freely available. So please do have a look on our website for those. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kat. You speak so fast. I was trying to write down everything you were saying, and I was like, whoa, I'm so glad we've recorded this. But thank you so much. I thought it was really important, actually, that you highlighted that this isn't a normal sort of situation. This is a rapid move to online learning, and that's where our fearlessness really comes into this. And just re-emphasizing that idea that as teachers, we need to make sure we are okay in ourselves and that we remember what makes good, how we deliver really good learning in our lessons and use those skills that we already have within reason. So I thought it was really, really useful. And I can definitely recommend using the Chartered College of Teaching reading lists. I've used them quite a lot. I find them really, really useful. So all of you listening, please do explore that free opportunity, which is really, really good. So thank you. We have our last, or not our last speaker, but we have Matthew Llewellyn, who is up next, and he's going to talk to us about basically how we've used tech, how we've embraced tech, possibly, maybe embrace is too positive a word. But how we can also use the skills that we've learned in this experience when we do eventually return to the classroom. So Matthew, over to you.
Thanks. I'm going to do something that no one else has done. I'm going to just present on my screen. I'm going to try and bring up a few web pages and just go through a few instances. I didn't think it would be sensible for me to try and summarize what online tech is being used right across the board because, well, first of all, I really don't know. There is a huge number of things that are used. I thought it would be best simply for me to kind of go through our experience, give a little bit of a framework of the way that we have done things, and try and sort of take some messages from that and hopefully be able to draw a couple of things out. When I was trying to think about what I was going to say today, I was stumbling a little bit as to what I thought the important things should be. And then I sat down last night and started to write a few things down and realized that I got way too many things that I wanted to say. There was just so many things to bring to the fore from this that I think it's best to try and sort of isolate just a couple of generalized messages. So I'll sort of take the journey through our experience, and then at the end I'll maybe try and draw out just a couple of things. I mean, the things that have already been said, I think really encapsulate almost everything that I want to put across, but I'll try and sort of frame that within the sort of technology side a little bit too. So I'm just going to put my screen up and just make sure that everyone can actually see that. Do you see that now? Rachel, can I just check that with you?
No, not yet, Matthew.
Okay. You should see a window that says Teams and Tasks. I really hope you can.
No.
It's just my face. Oh,
yeah, just your face. Have you
Yeah, so it's great, isn't it? The technology guy can't undo things. Right, let's try one more time. It did actually come up with an error message that I didn't spot. Just like being on one of my lessons. Okay. How about that?
No, it's not there, Matthew. Oh, hang on. Something moved. Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
What a relief. Okay, good. So really, I sort of want to take us back to the start of the year when it was sort of coming clear to me that quite a lot of our training for using technology was hard to fit in with all of the other kind of training that we needed. So I had essentially stolen an idea from Chris Turple, who works up at the Trust, the head of learning technology there. It's a great idea of essentially gamifying learning technology and just trying out a few things. So we split everyone in the school up into all of the teachers, at least into teams, and made them compete against each other for trying out new things. That's just the page that they saw at the front, and this is a website that I built for them to access all of this from. They saw something like, which hopefully coming up onto your screen now. It's essentially a big spreadsheet that has got lots and lots of different types of things that they can try out. So student skills, things for teaching and learning, things for their professional skills and growth, all sorts of different ideas essentially for them to have a go at, and they scored points by doing that. Now, little did I know that this would actually turn out to be a really useful way of starting to shift an idea about using technology in different ways online, and for there being sort of a constant reference for the teachers to fall back on and have that centralized. I thought that would be a good idea to have a simple central way for them to refer to something rather than rely upon email. Now I'm going to come back to that in a second. For the students and for teachers too, our way in which we communicate online is through Google Classroom. This is essentially just an overview of what Google Classroom looks like when any teacher comes in, and students see something very similar to this. We've used it pretty much since the start of Google Classroom, but when it first came online, I think that was around about 2016, and we've really grown into it, and we've adapted the way that we do things, using it specifically for homework up until now, based around the kind of functionality that it's got. It's always been fairly straightforward, fairly basic, and in that it has got quite a lot of strength. We use another company to manage this, so all of the classrooms are populated by that company. All of the students, all of the teachers don't have to enter any of those classrooms. They're put in them automatically, so all of the structure is already there. So there's no worry for the students, there's no worry for the teachers about getting the basics set up. They're already into the right rooms. And there's also a way in which we can push this out to parents. Parents receive, if they choose to, a summary email at the end of the week, and that continues now. That summary email essentially tells them all of the activities that that have been set through Classroom, and essentially whether their daughter is on track with those things or whether they're falling behind a little bit. So that's essentially just one picture, one overview once a week for those parents, but it does keep them in touch directly with what's going on with the work that's being set. Now, we chose really Classroom to be the center of the way in which we would continue to talk to the students, to communicate with the students when they went off during the lockdown, as it continues now, simply because we knew that this is the way in which they liked to communicate. We realized that it was not a sensible thing to have too many pathways of communication with them. It'd be best for them to see simply one place that they would go to in order to get the information that they need, see the work that's been set, and hand that back and get some kind of feedback on it. And it's likewise true for the teachers. There's one place for them to go and one place in which they know that they're going to get that effective communication. There's not only classes set up for academic work. If I scroll down a little bit, you can see that there's classrooms here that we've set up for whole year groups, and also for PSHE and for the houses as well. Those are really useful on a pastoral side, and they're useful likewise for instance, this morning, where we were able to show all of the students an assembly. So they get that communication via those whole year group classrooms, and it's a way in which we can, again, like I said, and this is really central, I think at least, communicate really clearly with them. They know that this is the way in which the information will come to them. In addition to classroom, we realized that it would be great to be face-to-face with some of the students. Initially, we thought this would be most sensibly done only with year 11 and year 13. However, almost immediately that started to spread outwards, and we realized the effectivity, the usefulness of Google Meet. Now that's something that we use, but obviously Teams on a Microsoft side, or Zoom, or lots of other schools have become fantastically effective in making that connection face-to-face. Meet is for us now integrated into Google Classroom, so the Meet links can be generated directly from Classroom. One of the worries we had at the start was that students would be able to set up Google Meets on their own and would not be able to involve the teachers, but very quickly Google responded to that, and they put little nicknames onto the classroom. So if you are the person that generates the classroom with a nickname, you're the only person that can initiate that classroom, and you can close it down at the end too. So that was a nice way, very simple way of constraining the limits of Google Meets, and you can then also say that only teachers can start them too. What I think has been found, and this is me personally talking as a teacher, is that this is a fantastic way of either starting or finishing a lesson. It's overridingly important that we have that face-to-face contact. I know that the students really, really appreciate it. It's a great way for them to respond to any problems they've got, to communicate any ideas they have. And I think it's a really nice way of just making contact. And I know that when I have my form time in the morning with my Year 9 group, they really appreciate just having a chance to see each other and have a forum to simply talk. So this two pathway communication that we have between Classroom and Meet, we found to be the most effective way in which to really draw in communication and make sure that the students are always clear about the way in which they're going to be contacted. There were some initial thoughts that email would be a good idea. I have teenage children, and they almost laugh when I say that I've sent them an email. It's not something that children deal with very much. Email is something that they know about, but it's really not something that they use. So them knowing Classroom already really well and using Classroom effectively allowed us to simply push forward using that, and it's really worked out nicely. Now, from all of this, I thought it would be sensible, really, and I'm just going to switch over to back actually to that site that I built for the gamification thing, but I've added a section to it. I think it was really useful for us to kind of have that idea that, that we need to be effective in the way that we push this out to teachers. So we produced something so that teachers had a reference point and always were able to pull in and draw in and see the ways in which they could try out new technology. And what I did across Easter too was then also build something for the students as well. The students have got this, the parents can access this as well. the overriding thought behind this was to keep it simple, and this is something that Kat really pointed to earlier. It was obvious from the experience that we had at the end of last term that we had to make sure that the only information they got was the essential information. I didn't want to put too many things in there that, first of all, they wouldn't look at, but also would most likely dilute that message. I've had some really good feedback from this, and it's really useful also. The students really actively engage with this stuff and tell you what they want and what they like. And interestingly enough, and this is something Fiona brought up, the well-being side of this, the few things that we put on there for well-being, and the contact that we give to them, they really appreciate that. They really like that. So just to sort of finish off, I wanted to just highlight a couple of extra things. I can't say enough about Twitter. It's an amazing resource, and I think that this lockdown has really shown it to be a fantastic resource for finding things out. There are really excellent people. This guy Eric Kurtz is great for Google stuff, and there's a number of other people too who are brilliant producers of information, but also great responders too. So if you've got any kind of question, you know that you can come here and get an answer. There's been some amazing things that have happened on Twitter too. Google have pushed out loads of information. I know Microsoft have done the same thing too. But there have been, for instance, global staff rooms that have gone on, a full 24-hour global staff room, so you get more ideas from that. And there was a 24-hour EdTech slam as well, where people just continually pitched in with new ideas. So I think there's a real drawing together of teachers to share what they've got and share their experiences too. Just to finish off, and I realize I'm over time, I do apologize. I'm just going to sort of say a couple of other things. On this side, and this is something that I find to be really useful, is just keeping a monitor of exactly how well used these pages are. So the sites that we built, keep a track of whether they're well visited and when they're well visited, and the sorts of things that are well responded to. And also I use bit.ly links with the students to just get an idea as to how many times they click through and when they do that as well. So a little bit of tracking helps us out and gives us an idea as to what the things are that actually do look interesting and provide the right kind of information. We've also used that site to collate examples of great teacher ideas and great student responses. We always get lots and lots of samples of really great lessons that have gone on, and we have worked out a way essentially of just sharing those as much as possible. Overall, the messages, I think there's one really kind of central message to all of this, as far as what this experience has shown me, at least. I think that the really interesting thing is that we adapted really well and really quickly, and I think everyone has sort of had that same kind of feeling too, that the adaptation to this new way of teaching and new way of learning has worked out really well. And I think that if we're going to take a message back as we go back in, it'll be that we can continue that kind of adapting, so that all of the useful things that we've learned now that maybe we weren't doing beforehand, maybe we weren't using technology as much before, we can adapt our teaching when we get back into the classroom to integrate those more and more. And there's no kind of barrier, because we've got that evidence that it wasn't really a huge barrier this time round. I also, the one thing also that I think is a really nice kind of thing that's come out of this too, is that, and I've seen this through communication from some of the students, is that there is a better kind of understanding in that school, student, parent triangle of essentially what technology is able to do and what it's not able to do, the sorts of things that it's able to offer, and in contrast what's not there too. So the parental involvement in that, and actually really kind of lots and lots of student involvement in that, has taught us a lot, and I think that there's lots that we can take from this. It's been a really fast learning curve, and I think there's lots and lots of messages. I find myself essentially being somewhat of a filter for the school. trying to get across just the important messages rather than the things that might be good. Trying to sort of look out for the things that I know will be useful. But the students themselves responded fantastically, and I think that that's something that we can take from this, is that they are incredibly benevolent. Really, they are very understanding, and they really do like the fact that the teachers are trying. They see the teachers trying, and they respond to that really well. And it really gives us it gives, as a teacher, it gives you a really lovely warm buzz, but also it tells you a lot, I think, about what's possible in the future.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And I'm sure, like, on behalf of everyone, I think Sydenham High has been so grateful and in debt to you, actually, for guiding us so well through the process of moving to online learning. I really like your everyday tips of the day, as well as all the other things, not to mention how you helped me set up a live stream, which was like guiding a grandma. So thank you very much. And what I thought about was almost the last thing you said, is that we've adapted really quickly, and it just drew me back to your image of evolution at the start, and how, you know, if you're put in a certain environment, you evolve at a faster rate. So there you go, we've evolved. And that brings us to our last speaker, which is the Chief Executive of the GDST, Cheryl Giovanni. So thank you.
Rachel, thank you. And I have to say, I feel incredibly privileged to be able to wrap this up. And I watched the news last night, and I was so incredibly depressed about just how downbeat everyone is currently about what is going on in the country. And I have sat here today, and I've almost thought, how do we package this up and actually create a sense of the excitement and the possibility that lies at the heart of what we are doing as an organization? Because it is incredible just how brilliant everyone is being, and how we are moving towards, you know, when I listen to everything that is going on, you know, the future is happening in real time. It is happening as we are living through this, and it's what we take from this and how we translate it for the future that is going to be so key. Just picking up on a couple of the themes that particularly resonated with me. And, you know, my job from all of this with Kevin is to really work out how we use the collective intelligence and knowledge that we are growing in the organization to move us forward. So I really liked that notion of fearlessness in the face of unfamiliarity, and just how much people are embracing the fear and doing something so positive with it. You know, guided home learning happened to us you know, almost overnight. And I remember going from a day where we were just sort of talking about what was going to happen next to literally going into lockdown. And for me, what guided home learning has demonstrated is just how powerful research in action is. We are creating a really powerful research platform, and, you know, a sort of a framework in which to test and learn in real time. And it's that energy and that culture that I think will play so much into our strength going forward and what we stand for as an organization. If you talk to other schools around the country, particularly freestanding schools and state schools, it is, you know, the GDST, I think the power of the network has been incredible in terms of collaboration and co-creation in real time. And actually the kind of openness, particularly that Matthew talked about, to what is going on in the world, and integrating that and developing it really quickly, I think will be the advantage to creating real competitive advantage going forward. Parents was a sort of a thread I thought that came through today quite strongly, and this partnership that exists between teachers, the pupils and the parents, and how much what we're doing is as much about educating parents as it is about educating their daughters. And, you know, I really liked Kevin's notion of talking about a whole new respect for teachers and teaching. And I have seen that just in the letters we've had from parents, both positive and those parents who've been particularly vocal about fee reductions, but they do care enormously about education and what their daughters are receiving from us. And even when they are being incredibly angry, I think if you see it through the lens that they really do care about what we are doing and how we are developing their daughters, that is really important. So that partnership with parents for me was really key. You know, teachers as heroes. We talked at our own staff gathering at Trust Office last week about, you know, how do we make sure we're an organization that is fit for a place where heroes want to work? And that's, you know, that's what's important. We are currently creating an environment, I think, that will play into us being, you know, the employer where people want to work because of the innovation and the collaboration and the sense of us actually using the power of what we've learned to really create something incredibly powerful at the heart of the GDST. And importantly, you know, it is a place, and this whole idea of action research, we are demonstrating every day how girls can learn without limits. So the theme of your symposium, Rachel, I think was absolutely key because it is what we're doing. From Fiona's presentation on pastoral, you know, it was really salutary for me just to remind ourselves at the end of the day, you know, it is about how we, and she used the phrase connect and disconnect. So, you know, how do we use the opportunity to really kind of step away, but then use it as a way of figuring out how we lean in, and, you know, reminding us about the physical effect of lockdown, that it's affecting all of our senses. I hadn't really stopped to think about that. And for me, that was really quite powerful in terms of thinking about self-care, particularly for the people on the call today. You know, think about checking in with yourself and making sure you are in good shape and that you are establishing your personal conditions for success, because that's what will make you do the job you need to do even better. And, you know, she spoke about engaging fearlessly requires that self-care first and foremost, and that is absolutely key. I really love the exercise, just stopping, you know, what is a good thing that you're experiencing from lockdown, and then what are one of your fears around guided home learning, and then just sitting, breathing quietly. How simple is that? And how much more control you feel as a result of that. And for me, a lot of that demonstrated, if we can be good role models and we can be transparent with the girls, sharing how we're feeling that fear, embracing it, and how they deal with it, I think what we will be doing is, in a very grown-up way, helping them understand some very valuable life skills. So, you know, what you can learn yourself about courage and bravery and about failure. We talk a lot at the GDST about, you know, not being afraid to fail. And this is the perfect opportunity, I think, to be role modeling some of that behavior and learning fast, testing and learning and changing things in real time, and then being good role models for the girls in the classroom. And again, you know, I just made a note here. I just thought, you know, this whole notion of leaning into fearlessness is an incredible opportunity to demonstrate what learning without limits really means. You know, we talk about that, but actually what we are currently doing is bringing it to life every day. So for me, it's a really exciting notion, and it's how we use the opportunity to almost embed it even more in our DNA that I think you are all doing absolutely brilliantly. Kat's presentation on research, I mean, thank you, Kat, the fact that we have access to the resources that you have available. But I suppose what your presentation made me think more than anything was how grateful I think we all should be for the fact that the girls in our schools generally have a device of their own. So they are not limited by, the vast majority of children in this country do not have that luxury. And, you know, we are incredibly fortunate that we have that at our disposal. But the important thing for me, listening to the talks today, particularly Matthew's, was we are not only reliant on technology. The fact that it is so multimedia and the way we have approached this is incredibly innovative. And when I look at some of the timetables and I see what schools are doing and I see what Sydenham is doing, it is incredibly exciting how we have managed to create something so brilliantly innovative that doesn't only rely on the technology. The technology feels like a tool rather than it driving everything about what we're trying to do. Human connection, I think Kat, you spoke about that, really important. It's not about the technology, it's about the human being, and it's about the power of an inspirational teacher and the way the technology is used as a tool that will make the biggest difference. And again, you talked about parents being engaged and motivated to support being really important. And involving them in this conversation is really important because we need them. And putting it in perspective right now, I think makes an enormous difference. And again, evidence of that, Matthew talking about that weekly summary going to parents. If I was a parent and I got that at the end of a week demonstrating what had been achieved, I mean, that is almost better than you would get in a normal, a normal week's work at a school. So we've almost surpassed what we were doing before in the way we've embraced that. And it really shone through for me today, just listening to the kinds of things people are up to. And, it just did make me think also what a huge ask we are making of teachers right now, how much we are expecting you to do and to get to grips with. And people just rising to that challenge is incredible. And I think surprising yourselves with just how much you can achieve. Rachel, you even saying, getting help to set up one of those calls. We are all making huge leaps. And if we are a learning organization, how good this experience has been for all of us in terms of making those leaps. Matthew's presentation also made me think quite a lot about speed and agility. The fact that we can move quickly and we're not getting in our own way and we're not being hidebound by the very traditional way teaching has always happened in the past. And for me, how do we capture that and take it forward in a really powerful way? So great examples of action research. That is my dog. We will ignore him. Face to face, I've spoken about that. The whole concept of gamification was just brilliant. I loved some of those examples. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go for 1 second. How professional was that? So gamification, what a brilliant way of teaching and learning, and for teachers, for students, and for parents. Really exciting. And I'm desperate to have a look at some of those charts that Matthew showed because that looked really exciting. Twitter, I hadn't appreciated just how much is going on. That whole concept of global staff rooms and that EdTech Slam. And that just suggested to me how important being open to learning from the outside is, and that we haven't insulated ourselves at all. I think the other thing Matthew talked about was stealing with pride, and where he spoke about stealing from, I think it was, who was it from? Can't remember. That's really important. How do we learn from what's going on around us and actually use it and integrate it? So that was interesting. So a way of summary. The other thing from Matthews was great analytics for measuring. How will we know what has worked if we're not putting analytics in place to actually take those things forward? So that was brilliant. And I like the notion he spoke about that this is a new way of learning. And if we can bear that in mind as we go forward and take it with us, what will that look like when we go back to a situation where we have sort of face-to-face interaction. The thing, though, that he talked about that I thought was really powerful is not to just assume that when we're in a classroom we have face-to-face, and the fact that some of the technology you're using at Sydenham is about connecting face-to-face, I think is what is limitless learning all about. The fact that we are talking about technology giving us the opportunity to be face-to-face regardless. So I love that. So in summary, lots of really great ideas, lots of interesting things, I think, for all of us to take away. What it really highlighted for me is a learning organization, huge amounts of collaboration, co-creation, and generosity going on. So really bringing to life that value of family for the GDST. Innovation happening all over, real testing and learning, failing fast, agility, being really fearless about what you're experimenting with. And again, you know, one of our values is about being forward-looking, and everything I've heard today suggests that that's exactly what we're doing in a very real and potent way. And, you know, at the end of the day, if girls first is what we're all about, all the things I've heard today is about how we're putting the girls at the heart of our learning experience and doing everything we possibly can to make sure that that is as powerful as possible. So that kind of, I think, is my wrap up. I've made lots and lots of notes, and they're just brilliant ideas. And I think one of our challenges for all of us is how are we going to take the brilliant ideas and make sure they are the things that, you know, what will be our legacy? How will we take them forward? How will we make them part of the kind of DNA of the GDST moving forward and really be that future-focused organization that we so aspire to being in the work that is happening right now in our schools. So I hope that's useful, Rachel, as a wrap up.
Very much so. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from our live audience, or equally from our external guests who are on the chat with us? If you do have any questions for the panel, please feel free to type them. I think Matthew's reading the ones from do we have any live streamed ones?
There was one point that was brought up was this contrast between independent schools and state schools. There was I'm afraid I missed it, but apparently Newsnight last night produced a really good report on there being quite a massive difference between the amount of work being handed in for independent schools, where it's about 50% at least, and that state schools are at best 27, and at worst, for the least advantaged schools, it's down to 8%. And I think the question just sort of generally was what our perspective on that would be. And I think really is, you know, it was from our teachers, and they were saying that how for us, we're feeling that we're pretty much nearer to even 100%. So it was sort of a little bit of backslapping a little bit for us, but also just a really interesting point to make.
Yeah. Who would like to answer?
I have a perspective on that. I don't think that helps us in any way as a sector. And, you know, if some of your teachers are feeling uncomfortable about that, I absolutely share their feeling, because, you know, we do not want to be successful at the expense of the state sector, and anything we can do to help, I think, is really important. And I know Catherine is working with some of your partnership schools in Sydenham to make sure that that happens. And one of the things that the ISC is talking about is how we support state schools with a catch-up program in the summer for a week, where particularly disadvantaged children would be given a state funded week of catch-up that we could potentially get involved in doing. And while I know everybody's working incredibly hard right now, it would be a really good thing for us to be able to do as a way of, you know, helping those who are not as fortunate as the children in our schools. One thing, though, to bear in mind, you know, about a third of the girls in our schools are on some form of bursary or support anyway. And because of our hardship fund through this, there will be a huge extra number of girls who otherwise would not be able to afford to stay in our schools if we did not give them some form of hardship funding. So I feel we're doing absolutely everything we can, wherever we can, and everyone who can be helpful to those around them should be doing that right now.
It might be worth adding, Rachel, that as a group of schools, of course, we have 2 academies. And
good point.
Those teachers and those pupils are involved, they're plugged into all the events that we run. And their teachers too are plugged into the training programs of professional development. So everything that you and your colleagues do that's part of the network is contributing to our helping at all levels, helping the academies. And we learn so much from them in normal circumstances anyway. So it's certainly not a one-way street. But I think we can feel that at least in that small way, we're plugged in and helping teachers and pupils in those directly in those 2 schools.
Brilliant. And I think Kat and Nahida are wanting to comment too, if that's okay. Nahida, do you want to go first?
I just check I've got my speaker on. Right. A huge thank you to everybody and thanks for the invite. And I'm a head of a state school, and some of the statistics last night, posted are very pertinent to us. But, you know, we have different challenges and different purpose. We're a different organisation. We come to our schools for different reasons. But I think the role that you play in terms of the values that you promote in your students and that sense of compassion and understanding of societal inequality and the different things that they will go on to do as doctors or whatever, it is a very important, crucial part of your work. So I don't think it's about anyone feeling bad or different. It's about just continuing with the work of, as your counsellor said, of values and a sense of who we are and what our roles and responsibilities are for all of humanity. That's my only comment.
Thank you, Nahida. Kat?
Yeah, so I wasn't thinking so much about sort of differences between independent state schools or anything, but that I think what is obvious from what's coming out already is that the disadvantage gap that has kind of been the challenge and the focus in schools for so many is narrowing that. This is potentially going to massively set that back. One of the points that I made around the sort of quality of teaching being the most important thing is particularly true for disadvantaged children. So Sutton Trust research suggests that that it makes as much as kind of essentially a year's worth of learning difference per year of a child's schooling for children from a disadvantaged background, the quality of teaching they receive. And that seems largely to be because of the sort of what they're not necessarily getting at home in terms of home learning support. And we don't want to make sweeping stereotypes here, of course, and it's much more varied than that. But it does mean that when schools are closed, it is those disadvantaged pupils for whom schools make the biggest difference. And if those schools are closed or pupils aren't able to access the learning as easily because of issues around devices, that's really challenging, and it is going to make a difference as far as the EEF, Sutton Trust, the RSA and others are predicting around the disadvantage gap. So anything that we can do to try and support the narrowing of that, to support catch up. There were some rather unpopular suggestions last night on the Newsnight programme about how that might be done. But we do need to recognise what that means and think about how we can balance that. And there are also challenges around the way exam grades will be given out. One of the potential advantages of exam grades over teacher assessment is that teacher assessment does occasionally seem to demonstrate unconscious bias in marks that are given by teachers and that are then reflected differently when examinations are used. And there is a risk that might influence what outcomes look like this year for certain groups. So there are a lot of challenges in this situation for the wider education sector, and reflecting on and understanding those as teachers as part of our role in the wider sector, I think, is really key.
Nahida, you say you have one more comment.
Yeah, just to reiterate really Kat's point, I mean, Rathfern is a network school for the Chartered College, and for that very purpose, because we are very clear that it's only a powerful pedagogy and evidence-informed pedagogy that is going to work on closing the gaps. And with this added huge challenge for us, it's even more important that we reflect on our pedagogy and work very innovatively and creatively to engage our students. And just thanks to the Chartered College in that sense for what it provides for all teachers.
Thank you. Sorry, Victoria, do you want to ask a question?
Sorry, hello. I'm just in the library, so the noise, but it wasn't really a question, it was just more a comment, really. I think just to say that through all of this, what we've really found is a really high new increased level of self-regulation from our learners at prep level, which where in prep, naturally, the children are expected to require greater support with their learning. I think one of the things I just want to say is that when we return to school, it's really important that we as teachers make sure we continue to support our pupils with this new level of independence, because what we can't afford is to have them come back to school and then to be kind of more receptive rather than active learners. I think, you know, we've really achieved something incredible with what we're doing. And I think one of the things we need to think going forward when we do return is how we then continue to maintain that momentum, because often some of the most successful learners in life, as we all know, are those who have fantastic self-regulation and who know how to manage their own learning and who are active learners. And I think, you know, it's just really important that we don't lose that when we come back to school. So that's I suppose that's my commitment, certainly at Sydenham in the prep. And I in the prep specifically because they are younger, and naturally you know there's a sense amongst primary and prep teachers that we know our pupils require support, but you know we've been blown away by the way that they're working so independently and so brilliantly at home. And it's really important we continue to maintain that momentum when we return. So I look forward to working with the other heads of juniors and preps to see how we can keep that going.
Fantastic. Shall we do one more question? I know we're 3 minutes over, or does everyone need to dash? Matthew, is there a good question?
The other question that came up was during Kevin's talk, was how he thinks the GDSD might be different, or we might be working differently after the lockdown.
I think it comes back to sort of what lessons we would like to bring with us back to the when we form up again. As I think I agree with you, Matthew, in terms of what we bring in terms of technology is a kind of sense of liberation, a sense of possibilities, and a sense of that just more tools in the toolbox. But I think, and this speaks to Victoria's point, I think, too. I think we need to work on, rather than row back from, an increased sense of independence and self-regulation and self-reliance that the students hopefully will bring. And one of the things that I didn't mention that relates to that, I think, is the sense that if teachers are finding that they've got more permission now not to be doing direct teaching and not to be feeling that you have to fill all the time by just addressing the class or even individuals and groups, if they feel that they can take their foot off the gas and there's still learning going on, even in person in classrooms, in a way that they're doing increasingly effectively in guided home learning, I think that would be a fantastic thing that we can bring back into the classroom. And as I said, across the trust, this continued sort of of collaboration. So schools like Sydenham in South London, it's the sort of quintessential example. You've got schools that are quite close together, and the amount up until now, the amount of actual collaboration subject by subject has been very, very small. There are always sort of cultural restraints in terms of sort of sharing and using other people's things and relying on other people, not just your own stuff. But this sense that, you know, especially in small entry subjects, we can actually share teaching and learning across schools to a great benefit will be something we want to carry forward. So I think those are a few of the things I think we want to bring with us as things that we've actually learned. This has been quite a constructive process, one we wouldn't have chosen to enter into in quite this way or at quite that speed. I think there are some real positives that we can bring with us.
I think if I can chip in pastorally as well. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
We can.
Sorry. Pastorally, I think it's opened our eyes a little bit to how we can support those students that you mentioned, Kevin, that actually are happier at home. I mean, I can think of a couple of our students who are engaging more at home than they would have done in school. They would sometimes struggle to come into school, and I think it's really helped class teachers understand that they can still access the curriculum, they can still be taught, and they can still learn. And that's going to be really interesting and useful to see what that looks like when all this is over.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. Fiona, I have to say, your talk, I was nearly in tears for some reason. It really moved me. I was like, I need to pull myself together for this.
Rachel, may I chip in?
Yeah, please, Catherine.
So I just, Fiona, you asked us to write down an adjective, and I'm going to say, and I'm going to confess at this point, that the adjective that gets me through every single day is the adjective grateful. And I just want to sort of conclude by saying that I remain every day hugely grateful. I remain grateful for the connections that I have as a head. Kat, to have those connections with you is fantastic. To be part of the Girls' Day School Trust is just incredible. The support that we get, that I get personally, but that we get as a school. I remain hugely grateful, Fiona, for the support that you continue to give us as individuals, which you always treat us as individuals, but also for all the support you give our staff. Rachel, you're just inspirational. The fact that you've led this today, you have been utterly fearless. You epitomise our motto of fearing nothing, and you've absolutely you've cracked this. It's amazing. So well done. I applaud you on that. Matthew, you are our unsung hero in all of this. I still take myself back to those lunchtime sessions where I learned how to use Google Meet, but everything that you have done has been simply phenomenal. I remain grateful to my SLT, but above all, I remain grateful to all my amazing colleagues who I hope are able to listen to this. And thank you to all of you for everything that you do day in, day out. I have incredible pupils at the school, as we've talked about today. And actually, we do have incredible parents as well. So I'm going to end with that. I remain grateful. Thank you to everyone. And what an amazing symposium. Incredible.
Yay.
Well done.
Thank you all.
Ian Matthews, you're the tech guy behind all of this. Thank you, because you taught me a huge amount as well. So thank you.
Well, I shall let everyone escape now for either their further online learning or maybe for a walk outside.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you,
Rachel.
Well
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.